Okay, welcome to this conversation with the Galactic Shaman Astrologers. And we were just checking in. The last time we spoke was about Lilith. And in fact, what I observed was massive severing of delusions, illusions, and fantasies in a really profound way when Black Moon Lilith crossed Neptune. And some of us here were just asking questions, and I saw a lot of like really strong response to asking questions about the larger institutions and who was promoting climate changes and why climate change is happening, and the whole of it became a really hot topic, and people were, from one spectrum to the other, having major arguments about policies, basically. So one of the delusions that I see being really severed is the fact that the planet needs some assistance. And I'm not here nor there on any of the spokespersons on that. I am just purely looking at it from now that we have come into a new cycle where the Piscean age is ending and the Aquarian age allegedly is supposed to be beginning. So what we're going to talk about is that dependency on those institutions, and then the finger pointing that happens, all because we all have such a huge dependency on the institutions. So this is a really interesting way to look at it, is that if Saturn and Pluto are the end of a cycle, which is clear that happens every 2027 years, and the last time we had that was basically when Spartacus in 37 BCE took 120,000 people who were enslaved by the Romans across the Alps, okay? And that was kind of like the beginning of Rome's fall. So if you follow the story of Spartacus, he rose up against the institution. So I don't know that we're going to get into Spartacus today, but I did look up that history, that in 37 BCE, Spartacus led a revolt against the Roman Republic. So we're at Saturn, Pluto again, ending another cycle that can happen basically just like that every 2027 years. And there's potentially going to be a massive revolt. And I see where it is right now is a lot of the social media is like, impeach this person, imprison that person. There's all this kinds of like pointing at the government as if it was the government's fault. But what we're going to get into with the age of Pisces is, did we give our sovereignty away to those institutions and expect them to somehow, care for us when we weren't in our own sovereignty? And the ruler of Pisces is Jupiter. So we're going to talk tonight about what would Jupiter be in Pisces. And now that Jupiter is in Sagittarius, what is Jupiter in Sagittarius? And if we get to the fact that Saturn is the ruler of Aquarius, maybe we'll get to that tonight. I don't know where we'll go. But when I first thought about this whole situation, the ages run about 2,160 years to make a complete procession. And the ages actually go in reverse. So we did the age of Aries, then we did the age of Pisces. And do you realize that everything goes back in time? So that's a key, in my opinion, that we're going to go back to something to get to the future age. That's a very big key here. Now, I've had a lot of clients with Pisces Sun, with Pisces Ascendant that just had the Neptune and Black Moon Lilith cross at about 13 degrees. And they all explained to me like a major severing of the escapism part of Pisces. they really like had to embody and step up and stop trying to either escape and long for death, which is one of the descriptions of Pisces in my neat little keyword for astrologies, is the longing for death. But more than that, one of my clients pointed out this sentence to me about her own Pisces sun. And she said, it's a chameleon-like feigned accommodation, which basically she was explaining to me that you pretend to go along with it. Instability and vulnerability to seduction that borders on being controlled by others. So if you just take that sentence alone, the chameleon-like feigned accommodation, instability and vulnerability to seduction that borders on being controlled by others. And what she explained to me was that she was willing to join any cult and give her power away to any messiah or any guru or any outside force, so that she had this feigned accommodation, like she was just going to shapeshift into that over there, so that she really didn't have to do her own life. And I think that is exactly it, is this, she wasn't truly seduced, she told me. It was that she feigned being controlled by a cult or a guru or an institution or a religion or anything. She pretended to be going along with that. So Jupiter says that life is impeccably just. So if we pretend to be controlled by the government or controlled by Monsanto or controlled by George Soros or being controlled by whatever, it's a feigned accommodation. It's not actually true. And what I'm going to encourage everyone who listens to this video is to realize that Jupiter will give you really a blessing or a thunderbolt. So Jupiter is one of those planets like Venus, which is a benefic, and it'll bless you and give you good luck and optimism and boons and positive outcomes, or it'll, by Jove, throw a thunderbolt at you and wreck everything, because life is impeccably just. That's Jupiter's thing. So now if we wrote this whole story that we were feigning accommodation and we were all sourcing out our food to Monsanto or sourcing out our rights to the government or sourcing out our spiritual life to the religious institutions or sourcing out our health to the medical system and saying, oh, I have health insurance, I'm going to just eat this crappy stuff over here and then go to the doctor and complain and get some quick fix because I have medical insurance. That is that feigned accommodation, pretending to be seduced by the medical system so that we don't actually have to do our own life, or we don't actually have to be responsible for anything. That was the age of Pisces. If we think about the Iron Age as the age of Aries, when we started military action and iron, I think that bled into the age of Pisces. The age of Pisces was this like handing it over to some higher institution or higher power. And Jupiter now is in this position of, well, do you need a thunderbolt? Do you need to just like wreck it all? And one of my questions, as I have Jupiter conjunct the ascendant, so it drives me nuts all the time, is how are we going to finish this story? Like, if we wrote the story, how are we going to finish this story? I mean, really, I am all the time going, what is the human race going to do? So if Jupiter's main motto is life is impeccably just, if you wrote the story, you can also write the ending. What ending are we going to write? And that is up to humanity right now, because Jupiter in Sagittarius is also a domicile lord going, do you want to just have a Armageddon? And that will be your highest truth? Or are you all going to get on your horses and ride? And in that way, take back the reins of your own sovereignty. So, I mean, I have tons of things that I could talk about with this, but I want to hear what's just coming up for people right now. Or you can ask me a question too.
Hi. Um, I I think what's been interesting with the Piscean illusion is that I didn't realize the illusion that I was living in until Black Moon Lilith went over Neptune, and then I was like, oh God, yeah, like that's what I've been doing, and it's kind of this for me. It's been this feeling of like, oh, I'm just exhausted by the life of like dealing with all this stuff, and I just felt like a lot of it's been how much can I hide behind things, and I didn't realize that I was trying to hide and use things as crutches, and that's like innocent. I think we all do it to a degree, but it's just interesting seeing um this kind of superpower come out, which is basically like I realize that I realize that I have everything that I need in me, and it's I don't know if that's Jupiter in Sagittarius, or I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but like there's a whole like revolution happening internally for me where I'm realizing that I don't the illusions are just coming like fish scales falling before my eyes, and it's hard to really say what it is at the moment, but it feels like seeing beyond the veil of what society says life is, and which I was trying to hide and shelter myself from through feeling like alienated. Even so the other day I was walking along, and I saw that there was a leaflet on the floor that said health insurance for over 50s or something. And I looked at it and I just thought to myself, how weird that we programmed what elderly means, and we've programmed what age people are meant to live until this or that happens, and we've created this whole system around it, the healthcare system, and I just sort of had this ecstatic feeling of like we can really create this the social realities that we want. We don't have to live in the kind of the prison of what the framework is set from a very Roman, ancient, old, like decrepit old thing that just it's like an old skull. It just doesn't need to be anymore. So it just feels to me like the door is so wide open when we start to have those scales falling from our eyes. And it seems really important for me with health and well-being through food and through yoga or for any physical support is just essential for helping us step through the doorway. I think like food is your medicine as opposed to medicine being people's food. So I'm like, let me learn how to be a herbalist, and then what is a doctor? What is? Yeah. So whole, everything is in the air and possible. Over to you.
Okay, well, I'll thread that together and see where people want to go with that. So because Neptune is in Pisces, we're getting to really know the age of Pisces and the illusions of the age of Pisces. That's the great thing. So what Emmeline is describing is those scales falling away. That's the unveiling of what we didn't understand about the age of Pisces. It's all falling away, right? So that's really the great part, is Neptune. In a way, when we made our video about Neptune, we were talking about how it is also unveiling all of the illusions that we had about menstruation, about medication, about who is an elderly person. I mean, there are so many things that are being unveiled. And because Neptune crossed my North Node with Black Moon Lilith together, I totally, you know, anyone who watches my social media, I have totally flipped the script completely back to food and permaculture. Like totally, I am 100% over there back where I began, which was that we have got to really be responsible for our own healthy food and our own medicine coming from that place. So the unveiling that's happening with Neptune in Pisces right now, we might be like going in and out of illusions and then go, oh my gosh, did you just see what that whole thing fell apart right there? And I'm wondering, you know, from a societal level, when are people going to start realizing that the entire government is one agency and they're all paid by Monsanto? And many of them were CEO or operatives that ran Monsanto and then became part of the government, both Republican and Democrat. And I'm always wondering, like, you know, when is it that that unveiling is going to happen? Because I've been following that whole farm thing for a very long time, because I come from Western New York, where some of my family are factory farmers. Like they have 700 cows. And they went from 70 cows to 700 cows because Monsanto took over the textbooks at Cornell University. It's just like the pharmaceutical industry took over the textbooks of the medical. So how did my family go from 70 farms or 70 cows and grassy pastures and big open fields to 700 cows living in greenhouses and not going outside? Like my actual family. So when I post something about factory farms, it's not because I don't know. Like I definitely know. I've seen these places. And they're in Vermont too. There's one right here in Woodstock, Vermont. We have never even seen the cows. They're all in a massive greenhouse. They have never touched the grass once. So there's some serious choices for us to make and realize that none of the institutions as they are right now can ever, no matter how much we complain to the government, can they ever do something? I worked for Bernie Sanders' campaign. Rose is here. She did too. And when I actually talked to Bernie Sanders and called his office and he was talking about the 1%, I like straight out asked him if he knew about the 1% that is actually ruling the 1%, which is actually an entirely different species than the human race. And there was silence after that. And the thing is that Bernie Sanders is a mouthpiece. Many people in Vermont know that he's bought and paid for. And he just represents that sect of humans that wants the, you know, the vote from those people who are angry at the rich people. Okay. So there's that whole unveiling there. And yet there's still a lot of people who very, very strongly look for a messiah within the government. And I would say that's Pisces, Jupiter ruling Pisces, of the old age system of that somehow, you know, some blessed God who is the Father will take care of us. And Pisces is the two fish. So it's like that fish which is in the sky is going to take care of that fish which is here. That's the way I think about Pisces, is that it was a beautiful thing for the birth of Christianity, because God the Father was something that we were trying to commune with. So that was that perfect age of Pisces. But now we're beyond that. I would say that the God the Father is there, but God the Father doesn't need to be the one who takes care of us. We do. And that's a huge and painful shift. That's a really painful shift. Does anyone want to talk about that?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts on that I was thinking of. First, my train of thought was between Pisces and Aquarius, and Pisces being a mutable sign and Aquarius being a fixed sign. And I have a moon in Pisces, and my ascendant is in Pisces. My sun is Libra, but so I can see throughout my life, I never had a messiah complex. I wasn't, or looking for, I think I was always looking outside myself for answers. I was seeking. But I think a big lesson personally, and possibly for what we've been going through in the Piscean age, is to learn about flow, the mutable piece. And that I know a huge piece that my husband, who's an Aquarius, has been helpful in helping me understand and integrate into my life, is the importance of the fixed nature of his sign Aquarius. And fixed is unfuckable with, you know, it's that sovereignty that you're talking about, that internal alignment with who you are, not even as an identity, but just an inner knowing, just this, you know, your word sovereignty is a great word, even though it's not one that we typically associate with Aquarius, but this internal fixed piece that allows you to be fully who you are, unapologetically and empowered. And so all these lessons of illusion and delusion, giving away our power, etc., are moving us into the place of one could argue that it's moving us toward experiencing more of this internal sovereignty, so that we can towards that Aquarian empowerment piece. Anyway, I'm losing my train of thought, but I feel, you know, in my personal life too, you know, just seems like so many things, every single belief system just gets rung through the ringer. You know, even in the institutions that I've been skeptical of. I mean, my husband just went through a journey with lymphoma, and you know, he's been this tremendous health nut for years, you know, in the 80s, living a vegan lifestyle. and focusing on physical fitness. And here he's like, me, I'm the one with lymphoma, you know? And so about, a year ago, we thought he just had, he was having gallstone attacks or something like that. And lo and behold, he's got cancer. And, I had been doing all this research on alternative cancer therapies, but really the treatment for his particular cancer that was effective and curable was a chemotherapy, traditional therapy. And so we sort of had to go through this process of what I called it was being thrown in the wave of a tremendous wave where you're tumbling and tossing and turning, and you just have to go with the flow until you're spit out on the beach. We are really, really, really tested to rely on our own internal guidance mechanism. Did we like the feeling of this doctor? Using our intuition, using our alternative knowledge to be discerning and make choices from there, but ultimately handed over to a process that was completely and utterly outside of our realm of anything. And I had just secured insurance. For decades, we'd lived without insurance. And if we didn't have that, I cannot tell you the expense, So, my belief systems about doctors and that medical process and cancer and alternative therapies and food being the answer just got absolutely turned up and upside itself. So again, my point being, what I've been thinking, what this conversation has been stirring up within me is this conversation between flow and fixed, the fixed empowerment, and the flow, which is also empowerment. So that's where the conversation has been unraveling for me. I don't know if that relates at all, but somehow one could start to connect that to Jupiter and the quest for truth and the lightning bolt and the expansion. So.
Yeah, I'll tie that together so that we're not going to throw Pisces away because we still are going to have to definitely flow with stuff. And everyone still has Pisces in their chart somewhere. So what Britt is explaining, and a very important point, is that when you need to flow and get the medical insurance and go to the allopathic doctor, you definitely use the highest consciousness that Pisces has to offer, and the Jupiterian writing the ending of the story, with your own power and your own ability. We're all going to still have Pisces somewhere in the chart. So the interesting thing is what the fixed sign Aquarius is also an element of embodiment that none of us have quite achieved. So I'll throw that out, and then I'm going to go back to, I know that Grant and Jessica wanted to say something, but Aquarius is space. It's electrical air. So all the other signs are earth, water, fire, or air. But Aquarius is an embodiment that then you become space also, like electrical plasmic air. And I know that's why some people think that Uranus is very much equated with Aquarius. But once we've mastered all the other elements, then it's time to step into that plasmic beingness. And people might have thoughts about that. So I just wanted to throw that out. But let's hear what Jessica and Grant wanted to say.
Okay, I wanted to share something from a chart that I drew of yesterday. I don't know, you can't see it, but I'll just kind of walk through. What I noticed was that Jupiter and Ceres are by each other in Sagittarius, making a conjunction. And then Neptune and Black Moon Lilith are by each other in Pisces, making a conjunction. And they're making a square to each other. And then Jupiter and Ceres are making a square to Juno, the sacred marriage bed. And Neptune and Black Moon Lilith are making a full line of opposition to Juno. On the other side of the chart, Juno is in Virgo right now, feminine earth sign. It was 20 degrees yesterday. And so I just was feeling like there are these different couples. And I guess I see Jupiter as like Zeus and Ceres, or like Zeus and his partner with, Neptune, this deep water, and then Black Moon Lilith, this void, almost like the old gods and the new gods, or the gods of chaos and the gods of order, or in the midst of like Kronos being thrown down and Zeus coming up for a time, and like a reckoning between, like, we had this age of, Zeus rulership here, and now we're trying to reckon with the wounds of Saturn and the great old mother, the great dark goddess that's kind of in the way back of our unconsciousness, and maybe more emerging into our consciousness and coming into a balance of that's the sacred marriage being within us, of the shadow of Zeus, the shadow of Ceres, are these other pairs of like, okay, are you ready to like look into the shadows and like make the reckoning, so that we can really have wholeness in the structures that we're creating on Earth, so that we're not continuing to like run into these projections that are ungrounded. And what I've been experiencing energetically here in this area is, there's a lot of tech industry here. There's, a lot of, it feels like the crown energy in people is just like, it's expansive. There's so much energy up here. And I'll find myself in group situations where I feel like I'm almost having a panic attack. And what I realize is happening is that because people are so up here, there's like this disembodied energy that's happening. And as a sensitive person, I'm like trying to ground it. So I've been doing a lot of work with the vertical line of really anchoring into the deepest parts of the earth, or the anchoring into the deepest parts of the unconscious, so that people can slow down and actually be in their bodies. That's my work as a yoga teacher, is to like, can we really get quiet enough and still enough to be present and sit in silence, or sit with whatever is uncomfortable, and just going deep. I know that's a part of my chart too, and who I am. But just feeling how trauma and anxiety runs. And at some point, we have to do that vertical grounding and connecting. And I think that's what the Pluto and Capricorn conjunction in January is really calling us to, like, where are we grounded, so that when the Aquarian age comes, and Aquarius is called the water bearer, right? And I almost like, is that like a holding of the great mother space, a holding of the feelings, a holding of all that's been in our unconsciousness that we've been too afraid to even look at or deal with? We've been running and living in these externalized projections. So coming back into that deep the, the deepest beauty within the darkness. And maybe some of the illusions have been like, it's too scary. But then the great illusion is, oh, but it's actually home. It's actually coming back into the arms of love. And that's what I was most afraid of. Oh! How terrible it is to be in a place of joy because I can't control that. There's a surrender that happens in the spirit of the human being to let go. But we let go in a rooted way that's connected to the tree of life, so that the light of the soul can keep expanding, instead of like what we were talking about, how in computers or math you keep building these lines that go out farther and farther away from the soul, or the splitting. It's like almost like we've been too cut apart now. We have to be gathered back into one. So those are just some of my observations with what's going on. There's also all these planets moving into Scorpio right now. And it's just been really interesting that, I mean, I'm talking about things that I've never talked about publicly before, and I'm noticing other people doing the same. It's like, oh, here we go. We're getting into the depths. So that's what I wanted to share.
Grant, you want to share anything?
I would highlight a couple notes on that. The conjunction of Jupiter in Ceres, and then almost a versus Neptune and Black Moon Lilith.
Mm-hmm.
As we were talking, in some ways, it's like a Titans versus Olympians, an old gods versus a new gods, a Greek gods versus a Roman gods.
Yeah.
And if we think about a Roman as this really bringing order and structure, and in some ways a rigidity of organization, to the point of it becoming unsustainable, organized to a point of destruction, of chopping so smally that you lose the cohesion, you lose the beauty of the whole. And then in some ways also you lose that connection back to nature of the old gods with their chaos and the unpredictability of nature, as we've had this freak blizzard, right? And in some ways a return. What if there's a call, in some ways tie back to your discussion of giving away of sovereignty to an organized religion as well. If you extrapolate from the Roman co-option of the Greek gods to a Roman co-option of Christianity as well, and then intermediate between yourself and the divine. Whereas a return to the old gods is sort of a reclaiming of your sovereignty and a reclaiming of your own divine connection to source. And maybe again, that's sort of an illusion falling away, right? Or to tie back into being able to be responsible for the things the ways in which we've given away our power, and really hold that intention of, the tension of, was that serving me? Was that best? Or did I give that away in a way that was destructive? I guess a few thoughts.
Yeah, I have a lot of things to say on that, but I want to keep hearing from everybody else too. So it's going really well. Holly, do you want to say anything, or Emmeline?
I was just going to say that I think the shift from the responsibility from having that complex of, like you were saying, Lolita, the father god, Piscean age, the kind of priest connection, and then the now it's you, kind of you, and it's all in you. And for me, the experience of going from very strongly Christian experience to being a more independent experience now, it's like the the full weight of that personal responsibility, but that paradox of but that's all in me now, so actually it's more amazing. But it's like that, holy shit, like no one's going to save me, but that means that I don't need saving because I'm more powerful than that. So it's like those two things working with each other, and I feel like I'm coming through it more now because it's less of a daunting thing for me. But at first it was just like, am I going to die? And that's all I could, you know. So yeah, I guess it would be normal to like feel depressed at first, and then you just start to come out of that depth of pain, and I guess that's feels like a karmic cleanse of just really allowing all that hidden wounding and pain that was there from all of our ancestry and stuff, where people had to rely on the Messiah because there wasn't the security to deal with all that stuff that they needed to deal with, whereas now we can do that and we can fail and it's okay, and it's like we are actually really stable even though we feel really unstable. It feels like a paradox again. It's like, how are we gonna grow our own food, and yet we know we're going to grow our own food, and it's like, I don't know how that all works, but it just is happening. So fairly miraculous.
Holly, you want to say anything now? No? Okay. So tying it all together about the old gods and the squares that are happening in the sky right now, Holly put up a chart in our group chat with the really clear square that's forming right now. Like by tomorrow, when, I mean, I already have the headache of moon in Aries. Already like, oh my gosh, a full moon in Aries. And it's squaring the Pluto Chariklo. So like when Jessica was talking about the different gods together right now in the sky, that's a really interesting pairing too. And that square, all squares have release points. So this is something that Kelly Hunter taught me. Kelly Hunter wrote one of the Lilith books and the coloring book with all the planetary gods and everything. So she said in every T-square like that, look for the release point. All right. So the release point opposition, basically about 18, 19 degrees Sagittarius, which is where Ceres is at 17 and Jupiter is at like 19 now. The release point is Al-Nalam in Gemini, the fixed star in the center of the Orion belt. So the release point for the opposition of that is Al-Nalam, where we get out of the duality and return to the oneness. And what Jessica was describing was sinking into those old gods. And I read this book when I was in Colorado about how the old gods left us. They actually left us because the human race needed to experience this whole other thing with the age of Pisces and the messiahs and the Father in the sky. So the old gods left us. Isn't that amazing? And I sat there reading that going, what do you mean that Dionysus left us? What? Dionysus left us? And Holly also, indicated that Bacchus was smack on conjunct the sun. I'm like, Bacchus left us? What does that mean? Why did the old gods leave us? And so I was out there looking at the most unbelievable grape harvest we have ever had, like full on hanging from every telephone pole and every tree out there is a giant thing of grapes, and going, maybe the old gods have come back. Oh, and maybe we're gonna like pull together all of these different gods now deep down into me and not put it outside of me, learning to merge with that, which is very Pisces, like longing to merge with that God out there. It's the like pulling it fully into me and embodying it completely. Every bit of it, and not fearing those old gods, Dionysus, not fearing Lilith, not fearing Demeter, which is Ceres, not fearing the great mother who also takes us down and, you know, to the winter, and when she's mourning the loss of Persephone, not fearing the winter. Because those of us in the northern climates are going, oh my God, like all around, like, whoa. But this is the first year where I don't feel like I really fear the winter. Like I am full on ready for this. So there's something of the release points in these. And I'm not sure exactly what the opposition to 20 degrees Capricorn is, but I know that that's somewhere in Cancer, probably near Procyon. I'm not sure which fixed star is over there, but there's some kind of release point there too. And these are the things that you know, are not really on topic in terms of Jupiter and Pisces, but there are two very strong squares forming in the sky right now, and it possibly feels like we have to combine energies. And it may feel like a spiritual crisis. So there's the opposition and then there's the square. And the square is highly tense and it feels like a spiritual crisis is happening. And it combines all of these elements that we've been talking about. When the Pluto square is really tight right now because Eris is actually retrograde from 23 Aries and Pluto is direct at 2048 or something like that. So they're coming back into that really tight square where we have to acknowledge things. And that was part of what I wanted to do tonight too, was fully acknowledge whatever's not being acknowledged. Some of what we have talked about in Galactic Shaman Astrologers is that the lie has become acceptable truth. And so we have to flip this whole thing and find out where the lie is that we've been told and that we've been accepting, and flip that over and be like, what's actually the truth in there? Because Pisces, and in the studies with my clients who have been telling me about Pisces, is they pretend to accept passively, in a self-sacrificing way, a charming facade. That's the actual word. So that's my North Node. So I'm trying to figure this out. A charming facade, which to me is like a lie. The strength is that the willing to make sacrifices, like Britt was talking about, like you're willing to be like, okay, I've been a perfect vegan. I've eaten really healthy foods. I've exercised my whole life. And now I have lymphoma. So the strength of Pisces is that we've learned to flow with it, have a deep understanding that life has its own cycles and that we may have signed up for something, and that all-encompassing love of Pisces is like, okay, I'm going to support you in this direction right now. At the same time, we have to be really alert to those charming facades that we have been easily seduced into by thinking if we vote for the right person, that the government is going to save us. And I think that is going to come up really strong this year in 2020. Does anybody want to talk about that?
I can certainly attest to the having a Pisces ascendant and whatnot, the cool, calm, and veneer of hiding, etc. It's one of the reasons I moved to New York, because I wanted to learn how to be ballsy and unapologetic and just be myself. But at the same time, I don't know. I'm just, I just am, a couple of things that, were triggered when we were talking about, it's like how, and I'm no, Christian scholar by any means, but I'm just thinking of like, quote unquote, original teachings of Jesus, or the example of Jesus being like walking straight to his destiny, saying, I'm fine with it. I'm just going to hang here. Don't worry. So like this facing your biggest fears, or walking into them rather than evading them. Also, his message of, God is within you, I am within you. And yet we historically have ignored that. Except, on the path, I think you certainly come to understand that more. But as far as the political, like I just feel like all I see around me are false veneers, false facades, false structures, false everything. I don't buy any of it. And yet I'm not particularly cynical. I'm just looking for, I'm more interested in what is really going on. I'm like, this, I can smell and see and feel an agenda. What's really going on? So I don't mean to be talking about myself, but the bigger picture here. Oh, my question to you was, I'm not making the connection to Pisces being this escape artist and Jupiter being the ruler that has nothing to do with escape. But like, I associate Jupiter and Sagittarius with a fierce revealing. And so I'm trying to connect those dots. I don't know what it means. I have been watching people like Greta being fiercely revealing, and this Canadian psychologist, Jordan Peterson, who's been part of all this controversy the past few years because he came out speaking about Canadians' laws wanting to control how you talk about, what pronouns you use to talk about transgender people. And ultimately his argument was for that it was an infringement on freedom of speech. Anyway, he's a very interesting intellectual to listen to, and someone who I've found very interesting. But again, he's kind of like this Greta to me, who's having his own sovereignty to go into conversations that are extraordinarily uncomfortable and really challenge the way we think and the common conversations that just get that we get too comfortable you know, when we use language that is not specific enough, but it gets part of common parlance or whatever. Anyway, so I'm just looking at these people who are really revealing themselves and challenging ideas and really saying, do you really mean what you're saying, people? Do you really know what you're saying, people? So I'm looking at those two examples, and I'm sure there are many more out there, people who are trying to be radically revealing to break up structures. I mean, you know, Trump and Johnson are kind of other figures like that who are challenging personalities. But I feel like Trump is shaking the core of political structures. I don't know what his agenda is, and I don't know what anyone's agenda is, but I know he's not playing any game that politicians are used to. But in my psyche, I am not really connecting the dots between the Piscean mutableness with the fierce radiance of Jupiter.
That's a good.
Anyway, blah blah blah.
Oh, that's perfect. I need to be asked questions because I don't know what people know. So that's what I'm glad to speak about the fact that Jupiter is a giant gas planet. And because both Sagittarius and Pisces are mutable, they're the last sign in the series of cardinal, fixed, and mutable, that the gas planet expands exponentially whatever it is that sign represents. So in Pisces, what Jupiter does is it massively expands consciousness in terms of the connection with the cosmic father, basically, and that somehow the cosmic father is where we're always longing to be, is re-merged, that longing to merge with the cosmic father. And so what happened in my understanding of Jupiter's role in Pisces is that it's super amped, expanded, and blessed the consciousness of the two fishes, one of whom was here and one was your religious person, whether it's the Buddha or Donald Trump, whoever your religion is, you get majorly I need to merge and have an identity with the Buddha. And so Jupiter is whatever you want, I'll make it bigger. That's the way Jupiter works. Jupiter in Sagittarius, which is a fabulous conversation because that's where it is now, was Ceres, who is his Demeter, the great mother. Jupiter in Sagittarius is, let me totally expand that archer who is only going to shoot for the truth. And so then everybody is shooting for the truth. And it creates gurus. It creates oh, Donald Trump is my guru. Sandra Walter is my guru. I don't know who is one. Deepak Chopra is my guru. That person is experienced in quantum physics. Nassim Haramein is my guru. So we're all trying to shoot for the truth with Jupiter and Sagittarius. We're riding our horse at top speed, and none of us really necessarily know where we're going at all, unless you look at the rest of the situation, which is that Jupiter this year has been making that opposition to Neptune. And so that's why, again and again, where we were going the only target across the chart was to shoot that arrow into any delusion that we have, any fantasy, any, you know, cult guru that I was following. And so personally, because Jupiter keeps going back and forth across my own sun, I'm like, I think I'll leave the 5D matrix now. In fact, I've left the whole fucking ascension bullshit, actually, at this point. And so for me, that Jupiterian shooting for the truth is like, I was just riding my horse at top speed in any direction to whatever gurus seemed to have the most truth. And yet, is she Artemis? Is she like the fierce archer? Yeah, I feel like there's this part of Ceres catching up to Jupiter right now going, and you better ground that back down into the deep, dark earth. Because that arrow shooting all over the place is going to get you all in trouble, and you're all going to be so gaseous and exaggerated in your pursuit of all the gurus that that's going to crash. So Demetra said that Jupiter is basically full of hot air, and whichever way it's, you know, in whatever sign it's going, it's making a huge hot air balloon. So if Jupiter's in Cancer, it makes a huge hot air balloon around motherhood and moral caring for others. Do you understand that? Is that helping with Jupiter?
Yeah, I mean, what it's sort of bringing up for me is the connection of belief versus truth. You know, I guess when I think of truth, I think of it with a capital T, and I think of it's not very grounded, but it's just the knowingness within that is the clearing that happens when the veil lifts, and then everything that you believed no longer is, and that always changes, and it always, you know, then you start to build up belief systems again, and then to have another moment where they become obliterated. And to me, that's the Piscean journey, but it's also clearly the pursuit of Sagittarius and Jupiter, the hot air balloon, the expansion. You know, we're just, you know, that's just what we seem to do as human beings. So that's what it brought up for me.
Anybody else want to talk about the truth? Because Jupiter loves that word, the truth. I'm going to read you a quick quote from this book that I enjoyed, and then you can all jump in. God is absolute truth. I am relative truth. My commitment is to the truth, big T, like God, not to being consistent. And I really have to ponder that all the time with Jupiter on the ascendant. That's by Gandhi. So God is absolute truth, big T. I am relative truth, small t. My commitment is to truth, big T, not to being consistent. And we as humans, I mean, particularly as an astrologer, I look like the most fickle person on Facebook, because basically I'm just saying what the planets are saying right now. And I have no personal opinion at all, because I have a Libra ascendant. So I could go any which way. Let's hear what Jessica and Grant want to say.
I was reminded when you were talking about Jupiter as an archer, and I was recalling the archetype of the archer is one that makes their own arrows, and how a long time ago the native earth people would, you know, very carefully make arrows and put their medicine on it or put their symbols on it, and then put them all, whatever the case is called, but there was something very spiritual about collecting all your arrows or all of your truth in whatever way that you understand that. And that can be very creative, and that may shift from time to time, but you know, that process of gathering the arrows and then learning to shoot those arrows to the center, that we're all looking at the center. The earth is in the center of the astrology chart. There's a theological understanding that to ask for forgiveness or to stop sinning was merely to turn around, go back to the center, and to hit the mark. So to have your arrow like in right focus, so that we're not just firing out the arrows everywhere and like depleting our energy, but like having that right focus. And for each of us, it can be as creative as we each are in our own authentic expression. And I was thinking of Carl Jung's understanding of God. He used the word self with a capital S. And that for a lot of us, waking up in this illusion is like coming, as he would say, like out of a too closely identified personality, like I am God, and the human part of us learning to be, I am related to God. And then in some weird way, you recognize that the God is within, or the God awakens within. But for him and his psychology, having a meaningful link with the divine was essential for human health and psychology. And the word belief in I think it's the Latin creo, is to give your heart to something. It's not just like a mental assent. I agree with this. It's like, what do you give your heart to? So yeah, whatever you're giving your heart to is your truth. He's my truth. You know, like, you know, you're my truth because I love you. Like, and that has a whole different shade of like, what's real. I got kind of pastoral there. Did you want to say anything?
I'm good.
Who wants to say something there?
I want to say that we keep covering the ground, and I think that's so key with like with the arrows grounding with Ceres and the earth, like the earth in the center of the chart. Yeah, like I just like so easily forget that. And all of these things that seem like so many options seem available, so many flipping options, and like with the Libra as well of my ascendant, I feel quite like who am I today? But I think Sagittarius to me is in the third house of communication and early study. So I keep feeling drawn to studying things, new things. And I have to just consider where is like, how is this grounding in with my past? Because I think, like you're saying about riding into the future in an unknown direction, it's grounding for me to see the footsteps I've been taking, and maybe like ancestrally or locally, and connecting in with the collective people around me, and how we can like shoot the arrow, but from a space of knowing where I've been, so that I might know a little about where I'm going. and also engaging that mystery a bit. But yeah, it can feel overwhelming, and because of the fire, it's just like you just go, don't you, with fire? You're just like, hi, it's hot, let's go. And yeah, I guess there's that grace period for figuring out what it is we want to give our heart to, like you said, Jessica. So yeah. Oh, and I also just felt like when you were talking about the politics for 2020, I was just thinking a bit about the schooling system, and with in the UK, there's a lot of stuff going on about mental health at the moment in schools, as I'm sure, like in the States. And there's a huge mindfulness yoga thing that's like starting to shift through, which is quite cool. But it's just interesting to see people are leaving the profession. More and more people I know through yoga and spiritual circles are leaving their teaching professions. And it's starting to become that the schooling system is representative of the politics. So it's literally like the classroom of the state. And it's just insane. And kids are not actually learning what they need to learn. So people are exiting through mental health disorders or addictions, and like really severely now at such a young age. So I think I do feel like in the next couple of years it's going to start to hit something, because all of our teachers, we're running out. The state is running out of teachers, and people who are being recruited are getting mental health problems as teachers. So it's going to collapse, I would think, in some way. So interesting.
Yeah, I want to jump in there real quick on that's how I see the story ending. So I was explaining that we can always take responsibility that life is impeccably just, because at any time we can write the story and write the ending of the story. And what I'm seeing right now is, I think you all may have seen that I posted an astounding thing. I never read the newspaper, but I was in a condo in Crestone, Colorado that happened to have this newspaper called Living on Earth. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. A newspaper called Living on Earth. That sounds good. So I read it because I was like, wow, that is a good idea, living on Earth. And it said that the leading group of people who are committing suicide right now are farmers. And I read it twice, and Claude read it. And second to that is opiate users. And so then I didn't really know what to do with that or believe it. But when I was driving, we drove the entire length of Colorado, basically from the Great Sand Dunes all the way back up to Fort Collins. And I looked, what do the farm fields look like? Many of them are not being operated or irrigated. They've run out of water. And in addition to that, it said that the tariffs are such that it's just a lot cheaper to get your apple from Chile than to grow an apple here. And so then weirdly, I'm collecting newspapers from my neighbors right now to start my wood stove, and a jar of pickles is $1.49. I could never, ever rationalize that my jar of pickles that I made from my garden would cost $1.49. There is no way that I even slice that suckers up for $1.49, because I'm $100 an hour. There is something happening right now where the end of the story is starting to appear, because my child, who has Saturn and Pluto and Chariklo conjunct her sun right now, Pluto smack on her sun, she just doesn't care about school. She is not remotely interested in it. It is a bunch of shit, and she just is not doing it. She's 16. And Kachina, who finished the top of her class in high school and in college on a scholarship at New Paltz, has chosen not to go on for her master's degree. So farmers are committing suicide, which is truly horrific. Opiate users who, you know, I said this week or last week that my clients are saying no amount of medication helps anymore. There is a certain amount of societal breakdown happening right now with the changes that are going to be necessary. So Emmeline is right. Like, I can see it, like, oh my gosh, if no farmers are making those giant fields of potatoes down in southern Colorado, you all better just plant your little potatoes with eyes, which is why I posted that this week. Like, any potato that has an eye coming out, I put it in the ground and you'll have a pound of potatoes from that sucker. I just want to make sure, Holly, do you want to say anything, honey? Because you have some good points.
Yeah, I've just been listening to everyone. And it's kind of interesting that you got to this point, because one of the things that, as I was listening to people, and I know our conversation's been about Jupiter today, but I kept hearing Saturn and Pluto creep in. And, you know, like the suicides of farmers to me is Saturn and Pluto, Pluto being death and Saturn being agricultural people, farmers. And I think for me, Jupiter is big. What is the big picture? What is the big concept? What is the abstract thought? And for me, Pisces is the more feminine expression of the abstract thought, and Sagittarius is the more masculine, outgoing expression of that abstract thought. And to have two big gas planets in those signs also paired, so Neptune being a giant gas planet and Jupiter being a giant gas planet, both paired with a very feminine astrological object, either Ceres or Black Moon Lilith, is a balancing of the energies in both big expressions of the masculine abstract thought and the feminine aspect thought. There's this big kind of coming together of what is the big picture and what are the layers of the truth of the big picture. In kind of like, what is this kind of overall matrix of our thought? Because for me, Jupiter is more of like the thought processes, the kind of the operating system, where, you know, Mercury for me is, and Saturn are more like the real manifestation of that thought. So, you know, we have these Black Moon Lilith and Neptune in Pisces. This is really kind of bringing down, to me, Pisces, which is, you know, oceanic and highly pliable and liquidy, and you can't really touch anything. And it's really just clearing that out. And then Jupiter in Ceres in Sagittarius is, okay, this is putting energy towards what is the next new big idea that we're going to bring in. And meanwhile, you know, because that's also the linking up with the galactic center, the great attractor, there's a bigger cosmic thought. So it's kind of like, what's the big new, what's the new thing that's coming in? But meanwhile, because for me, in my own personal chart, Mercury and Saturn are much more dominant. So it's okay, but how does that translate to the actual physical reality? How are we going to implement that? And that gets into the more nitty-gritty details of life and how we, in my experience, how we physically experience that. So for me, it does feel like it's a big shedding of illusions and templates of the way things have been, so that we can shift into a new kind of vision to manifest in our physical reality. But everything is shutting down, and it's going to have to get rebooted. And with that Pluto Saturn conjunction, that is ending of a lot of physical things. And then one of the things that I was thinking about is when we were talking about the square that points into Cancer, where we need to kind of go to our heart, self-nurture, self-develop in order to bring that out into our reality. And soon the nodes will eventually shift. The node will shift out of Cancer, and in 2020 it'll shift into Gemini and Sagittarius. So which will be this next wave of bringing that thought into kind of more physical landed what's going on here. So I just feel like we're in a ginormous, if that's even a word, review period of, all right, let's look at where we've been, and we really need to make internal decisions on where we're going. So that, for me, it's just this, the very biggest picture, right up to the age of Pisces shifting into the age of Aquarius. The very biggest pictures are shifting. So who are we and what do we really want to be? And then when we were talking about the point of the old gods leaving, it was like, yeah, this was stepping out of the way so that we could come into our fullness of our own expression. But sometimes that's a bit of a birthing process, and to really sometimes experience things and choose for ourselves what is for us and what is not for us. And some of that has been some of these experiences here that have been not always the most pleasant thing to experience, so that we can make a choice of what is for us and what is not for us. So it's very much the kind of the heaviness of the times, with all this, big heavy energy. And I was watching another podcast, and it was actually looking back to one of the Hellenistic podcasts, looking at, does astrology actually work with Christianity? And it was talking about how they both kind of really became prominent in this kind of first century AD, and how some of the early Christian writings are talking, they actually, if you read the ancient Greek, they talk about ancient terms like fall and exaltation. And that at that point, one of the choices was, do you stay with kind of the old belief system of astrology, that you have a fate and a fortune and that your stars are kind of governing you, or do you kind of choose this new religion and that you are choosing some kind of salvation in your own authority of your own path? And that seems like that was some of the choice that was presented to the early Christians or the early Romans and Greeks when they were choosing their personal philosophy. And at this time of where we're shifting the ages again, it's again this kind of a choice. What is your personal philosophy? What is your personal belief system? And how do you work with the cycles of the universe to achieve what you want to achieve or experience? So those are just some of the thoughts that have been running through my mind as I was listening to everybody. And I don't know if that lands or if it's just like completely like the ramblings of my own mind, but I'll let you guys think about that.
I would love to say something about that, Holly. And I love how you were able to paint such a big picture and tie it back to like the ancient Greco-Roman model and that choice point of, because I do think some of the resistance that I'm feeling, because I did go to seminary and I worked in a church, and I'm surrounded by a Christian community. And as I study astrology, there's this kind of like, well, we already decided a long time ago that we were going to have free will. And so how does astrology and free will work together? And I know Demetra talked a little bit about that in her book, about how much of our life is determined by the stars. And I've said this, I think Lolita, you said this too, that the stars give us these choice points so that we can be sovereign, and that there are these moments, and Cobra has talked about this too, where there's an alignment and then we have a choice point there that can be very impactful. And I was reading something about ancient Lemuria, and they were talking about how the women used to educate all of the children, sitting them in a circle, and they had like just these 5 spokes that they would study, And it was so that everyone would see that they were all equal, no matter what level of learning that they were at. And the teacher would walk around the outside so that they wouldn't be elevated above the children. And one of the lessons, according to this book in ancient Lemuria, was that that each of us had the ability to star steer our life. And that just stuck with me. It felt really resonating that when you study the stars, you can make more conscious choices in how to steer your life. And I think that's been the gift of astrology to me, and studying my own chart is almost like I have the freedom to steer my life in a way that I actually wanted to do, but I didn't feel like maybe that was the right thing to do, or I felt cultural pressure to take a different choice, or some kind of external pressure to do this, when my chart was actually showing me, why don't you live your dream? Why don't you steer your life with that thing that really makes you come alive? And so I hope that we can, as we find that, I think there's another choice point that's happening with that conjunction coming up in January, or like, what are we collectively trying to reset here? And I hope that we can weave together again the consciousness of star steering that heals a lot of the maybe the nihilistic wounds of we are abandoned by God. We're abandoned by the old gods, or abandoned by our government, or whoever we feel abandoned. We're abandoned by the goddess, she left. And can we honor the earth and star steer at the same time, and really get that alignment fleshed out? That's my hope. And thank you all so much for sharing and helping me learn. Appreciate it.
Good. So let me just really ground that Jupiter thing with this whole conversation, and the fact that, yeah, Christianity and astrology made a major turning point 2027 years ago. So listen again very carefully what Holly said. If you listen to this video, Jupiter is the big picture, the big picture. And it's like being able to see the whole forest and the whole cosmos. And sometimes it's so big and so vast that it feels like we have no idea which way to steer that horse. And it's just a massive, expansive, like, mind-blowing thing, which is like my entire life, because Jupiter's conjunct my ascendant. So like, the reason I have to garden, and the reason I have to sit in the dirt between all sessions, is because Jupiter on my ascendant makes it all too big. I have no idea how to get it back down. After doing, you've heard some of my sessions, you've all had sessions with me. It's gigantic all over the place. And how to ground that back down into Ceres, Demeter, the Great Mother, down into the corn and the grain and the soil. And that is maybe the thought of the future, which is what the Archer is pulling towards the galactic central sun right now. That's what I heard Holly saying. So I'm kind of, pushing that thought a little bit further, because Ceres and Jupiter were both going back and forth across the great attractor, which is the womb space. And now they're both pulling for that galactic central sun, for their conjunction of the future thing of, if we're going to get really big and spacious like the water bearer Aquarius, make sure that you're also grounding it deep down into ancient mother Ceres. And what Holly said so skillfully is that the black moon Lilith, who severs the Piscean age with Neptune unveiling the Piscean age, is doing that work. I mean, that was so brilliant, Holly. So I hope you hear this back to you, okay? And at the same time, Saturn and Pluto are coming together going, it's all complete. And Chariklo says, now shapeshift. Shapeshift now. Because as Jessica said, if those arrows are going everywhere, Chiron is going to get hit with a mortal wound, but he can't die. Oh my gosh. Like the whole session was so Jupiterian today that I don't even know how to end it. Yeah, it's just like we could keep going. It's so expansive. The thoughts are just gigantic. But we're going to have to end it now and figure out what to talk about another week. So does anyone have like something really juicy they need to put in still?
Well, just a reminder that Jupiter is the greater benefic, and so whatever is going on even though it may not feel like a big blessing, it is that ginormous, biggest gift that you could ever imagine. That is, in my opinion, that is just what you need and is beyond your dreams.
Okay, we're going to end it with that. We'll take the blessings from Jupiter. Thank you all.